Welcome to Pulse of Culture. I'm Karolina Szapland. I'm here in Warsaw in the Modern Art Museum talking to Tomas Phifer, the architect behind this wonderful building. Thank you for finding time, especially today.
It is my pleasure. It's an honor to be with you.
Tomas, could you share with us what was your one guiding principle behind designing this museum?
We wanted two things. One, for it to have a presence in the city. With all of the history that the Palace of Culture offers, with the commercial across the street, across the boulevard, we wanted this building to be a strong work of architecture that had a sense of permanence. And so within that context, we developed this white concrete, and we made this building white, so that in fact the art would have more presence. We also were obsessed with daylight, the daylight of Warsaw, having the light be woven into the experience with the art, so that every day, which is a different day of light, would be represented with these works. So it was this context of making the architecture more present in the city against the voice that the palace has always had. This is a new voice. It's a voice of these coming generations.
So the environment of the Communist Palace of Culture was always very chaotic and very political, politicized. How were you trying to make this space more cultural, more artistic?
We wanted these rooms here to be these frames for the art. You know, usually in museums you have flexible walls that you can move. So in a sense, the art is curating the architecture. But here, the curators wanted rooms, permanent rooms that would, in a sense, curate the art, so that these rooms would have a presence and have a procession as you move through.
And these rooms, and especially the first floor, will have a huge presence in the city because you deliberately made it so that it can be easily accessible. Is this openness for the local present in any other aspects of the building?
Well, we certainly wanted the ground floor to be open and accessible to all. There's a continuous arcade that's glazed, so that it is like a threshold coming into the museum. We have an auditorium there. We have a special gallery on the ground floor that's called the Reaction Gallery, where an artist is given a month to come up with what he thinks is going on in the city and the country at that moment. We have the main social space, which is the stair in the middle. We have a bookstore, we have a cafe. So that is all open and becomes the welcome mat to the city. So then as you move up through the building, you then begin to encounter this social space, this stair, as you move up and through, that's welcoming. So that in fact the museum is there to encounter the art, but it's also there to encounter each other. This is a meeting place. It's a piazza. It's a place where people come together for discussion, for discourse, for joy.
And this piazza is, as you said, beautifully and naturally lit. So was that a sort of a deliberate answer to the climate change? Are there any other elements that sort of sit within that narrative of making buildings more eco-friendly?
Well, certainly the daylight was here. You know, I think the number that I've always understood is 60% of the energy that's used in a museum is with the artificial lighting, light bulbs. And by having all of this daylight and not needing to turn on the lights as much, we save a huge amount of energy during the year just by that. These walls that surround the museum have an enormous amount of insulation in them. The glass is triple pane glass so that we keep the temperatures in the museum from copying the ones that are in the city. So the building is very, very energy efficient. As you move through the building, you are woven together with the daylight of Warsaw.
And that's beautiful. And how deliberate was this framing of the view through your special viewing windows?
Well, you know, it's like a Japanese tea house where you sit on the floor there and the opening is framed. You look at the garden, you're there for hours, and you watch the sun move slowly across the garden and the light changes. So that notion of being there and heightening the experience with a framed opening was on the top of our minds in these wood-lined rooms. So after you've encountered 2 or 3 rooms of art, you come to these wood-lined rooms that are made of Polish ash wood. There's a wooden bench there, there's a library table, and you sit on the bench and you look out of a window. And that window frames a particular view in the city of Warsaw. So you're not only connected in this softening room with wood, but you're also framing this view of Warsaw, which heightens your sense about where you are within the museum.
So are there any other elements that are sort of artisanal and linked to Polish style and Polish materials?
Well, this concrete was not made by people outside of this country. These were made by people in Warsaw. They mixed it beautifully. They poured it beautifully. They vibrated the concrete beautifully. The forms were built like pieces of cabinet work. It was just built with great, great care and pride. All the forms were made in a big tent in front of the museum. And you walked into that tent and there were these older men there, some with beards, and they were making these these forms beautifully, like cabinet work. And as I was leaving one day, the head of the concrete, the portion of the concrete with the contractor, he put his arms around me and he said, "This building is a matter of pride for us." And that brought tears to my eyes, you know, because you can imagine that they've lived a long time in this place, and the voice of the people of Warsaw for decades, they have had no voice. You have had no voice. And so the fact that this building has this voice sitting next to the palace, I think really had them understand what this sense of craft, building this building, would mean for them and for the city and for the people that would come through the building. That is the epitome of craft, is this sense of pride.
It's not a building without its critics and Polish people, you know, they love to love things and they also love to criticize and to hate. And of course the building was famously compared to a white shoebox. How do we break that narrative? How do we make people understand the inner beauty and inner truth of this building?
You have to come inside the building. It's like a magic box. You come inside, you feel the auditorium, you feel the education space, you see the stair winding up through the building bathed in daylight, you see the cafe, the bookstore, and then you begin to climb up and through, and you visit the rooms here. You see the daylight, you feel the warmth of the light.
And that warmth of a light, it's also quite extraordinary to experience the white concrete up close, because it feels almost tactile. How did you achieve that effect?
Well, you know, I feel the same way. You know, with concrete, since it's such a handmade material, you never quite know how it's going to turn out, because it's poured in particular temperatures, with particular humidities. But here, it looks like marble. It looks like marble. You want to go up and touch it. It feels so beautiful. It has that sense that I could have never written about or understood to ask for. It is the way that it's the honesty of this material. They were the ones, these craftsmen, that understood this material. They were the ones that brought this museum. I've been all around the world. I've never seen concrete like this before. And I think it was this sense of pride, this sense that we understand what this voice means.
And do you think, because you're not, you're an architect first and foremost, but you also teach about architecture, do you think your students will come here from all over the world to experience this building?
I think you will see a lot of people coming to Warsaw to visit the building. But a lot of this also, in the floors and particularly the ceilings, you understand how the building is made. We have large columns. You understand how that connects to a beam. You understand the beams in all of the galleries that understand how the building from floor to floor is supported. So the building is kind of self-evident in the way that it was constructed. There's not much that's covered up, and the story that I tell, it took a year and a half to get up to the ground level, because there are subways that are running underneath here, active subway lines. Those subway lines were built in 1955, 1954. And nobody really knew exactly what was down there. So they had to dig around the subways to figure out where the columns would go. And they poured these enormous beams that were 2 floors high that spanned across the subway lines. They got rid of the vibration. But with this came this very special rhythm of columns. They weren't even bays. Some were small, some were large. And so as the building rises out of the ground, that same expression of those beams is expressed in all of the galleries and the public spaces. So that you read this sense of archaeology, this building coming from the earth, this very unique condition, this place of history down there. These subways were built in 1955. So this moment of history is rising up and representing kind of iconic structure that supports the building and makes it very clear about that. But not many people are going to appreciate.
Well, they will know now. Yeah. And the building is, you can already sense that the building will become an icon, and not just for art lovers. Was it deliberate? Today I saw many young people taking selfies, recording TikToks. Was that deliberate, creating those little spaces for young people to be able to express themselves?
It's such a joy for me to watch. It's so hard to predict. We thought we were making spaces that would be filled with joy for particularly younger folks, but you never really know. But being here this week, it's the first week I've seen people in the building, and you see people that are smiling, that are taking selfies and pictures, and it just feels like the building is already being loved like that. And because it's loved on this kind of ground floor, you can see people then, these same people coming up, and they're curious about what's up here. They're curious about the stair. They're curious about the big view of the palace. And they're walking around in the galleries, and they're stopping in these meditation rooms of wood. And so they're exploring. And I think if folks that don't quite understand what I would call this magic box, that they would come in and enjoy it and spend an afternoon here and rest, encounter the art, have a coffee, be a part of the education space, and be a part of the auditorium. Maybe there's an impromptu dance or a lecture there. It's like a forum, it's like a piazza. It's a place for people.
And are we to hope that after these 20 years waiting for this building, are we hoping that this museum will draw new energy and will be some ways of recreating Warsaw, just as it happened for Copenhagen or for Bilbao,
Yes.
when a big art institutions, it was just a rebirth for the city. Are we to expect that?
Well, yes, and it goes back to what I think is a point that is hugely important, that the city decided to build it here. They didn't build it in a park. They didn't build it outside of the city. They didn't build it in another neighborhood. They built it in the middle of Warsaw, next to the palace. And I think that proximity and the history that this building will surely evolve into as a part of the history of Warsaw will be this remarkably fresh and important voice.
Tomas Phifer, thank you so much for creating this magical box for all of us to enjoy.
It's such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. I was talking to Tomas Phifer, the architect behind the new Warsaw Modern Art Museum. Come here to experience the beauty of this building for yourself.